How is it that two entrepreneurs can start a business at the exact same time and 2 years later, one of them is 20 times as big as the other one? And how can an entrepreneur achieve success, make some big risk, lose it all, and then start over again and then achieve back to the same level of success in a fraction of the time compared to somebody who's starting from scratch? That's the question that I want to answer today in this video. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Alex Hormozi. I own acquisition.com. It's a portfolio of companies that's about $85 million a year. And the reason I make these videos is because I was once broke, and there are a lot of people who are broke, and I do not want you to be one of them. When you are scaling a company, one of the difficult pieces of this, because I've tried to think back, like, why is it that every single time we start another company or we acquire an interest, everything goes so much faster, even when the strategy itself is not that complex? And so think about this structurally. Most business strategies are not complicated. Find something people want, charge a lot of money for it, and deliver that thing really well, so much so that they tell other people about your product. It's not overwhelmingly complex to consider. The execution is difficult, but the concept is not. And so a lot of people think they're going to win on strategy when they're starting a business, when you could have two people who have lawn care companies and one person has a lawn care company worth $1 billion and one person that can barely break $5,000 a month. It's not because the strategy is significantly different, it's just the execution. How is it that an entrepreneur or two entrepreneurs can start at the exact same time and one can get 10, 20, 30 times faster? Or when you start over again, you can always skip these steps to get to your level of incompetence. My theory around this comes down to pattern recognition. And let me explain. It's not just pattern recognition from the perspective that you have strategies or something that you're recognizing, but actually patterns in people. And so I'm going to give this a quick story to drive this point home. I have struggled for the last decade to find an assistant. And so it's one of the things I'm actually, a little embarrassed about, but I've gone 0 for 7 on assistants. So much so to the point that I almost kind of gave up just even trying to find an assistant. And until recently, every time I had an assistant, it just always right off the bat, it just never felt like right. And I always was like, yeah, maybe it'll get better. And it just never really did. And the problem was that I didn't know what it looks like when it's right. And so in the videos that I talk about, I use the term ideal scene. I don't know what the ideal scene of this dynamic looks like. When we are scaling companies, right? And I'll tell you what I found out there in a second, but like when we're scaling companies, what we have to do is pay down ignorance tax of knowing what ideal scene looks like, which is where speed comes from, having people who have outside eyes look in who already do know what ideal scene looks like, so you can skip steps faster. And so I'll give you an example of what this looks like in real life. Like for me, in the role of executive assistant, thank God that like for me, it wasn't a necessary thing to continue to grow the businesses. Now that I have one, I don't ever really want to live life without one. But the entire time I kept bringing people in. I didn't know what to look for. We do hiring, we do a hiring process. We do an onboarding and training process. They never really got up to speed, or we never really got in sync. And then I'd slowly kind of fall away. There would be distance, and then it became kind of awkward. And then I would end up having to cut the relationship. And so in this instance, we immediately synced up. I really like the person. I trust the person, and they are so proactive in all aspects of my life that I just sit down and start working. And then she places things in front of me. I'm like, hey, I got 13 minutes. She's like, cool, do this. And I'm like, oh, I've got, 18 minutes here. She's like, cool, do this and do this. And every time I'm done, I'm like, hey, what else should I do? And she's like, boom. And so we meet based on the priorities that I have. And then she has this big stack and knows how long every one of these things takes, because I talked to her about how long I think the task will take. And then as I have openings, we slot it in. So it's like I wake up and I'm just crushing work until the end of the day, because I know that the amount of time that's been allotted for each of the tasks is the appropriate amount of time. And if I do finish early, I get another task done, right? And so we can crush stuff. But it's not so much that this is the importance of the executive assistant, more so that it took so long for me to get one. And now that I do have one, I know that I will not ever not have one for the rest of my life, because now I know what ideal scene looks like. I know what to look for. Within the roles that exist in the company, there are going to be these gaps as you're growing. You know, probably on some level, that you might need somebody who's going to be a director of marketing. You might know on some level that you need somebody who's going to be a director of sales. You might know on some level you need a director of HR, director of finance, director of customer success, director of product, director of, all these different things, right? Legal maybe. And so these heads of the companies have to come in. And so there's two different ideal scenes that you have to know. Number one is what sequence these people will best fit and you hire, because you don't hire them all at once, obviously, as you're scaling. But the second is, what does that person look like? Not just like, what does the role do, but what does somebody who's very good at this role look like? What we're doing is looking at people who are exceptional at the role and saying, how can I find something just like this? And that is why people can go so much faster, because once you have figured out what a sales director look like, who's good, or a salesman who's good, or a marketing director who's good, you can find and duplicate that pattern again. Fundamentally, like this is like my belief in terms of speed of scale, is that you do not know what the people look like. And it's one of the issues that we deal with the most with our portfolio companies. So the portfolio companies that we work with are almost all e-learning and coaching type businesses and service-based businesses. And we work with those companies and they're like, hey, you know, my mom can do some math, and so she's going to be our controller. I'm like, I don't think she's what. That's not ideal scene. That's not what this looks like. Like just being able to do math is not. I mean, it's a requisite, but it's not all of the requisites for becoming a really good controller. And to the same degree, it's like, hey, we've got our top salesman. He's going to become sales director. Like, I don't know if that's necessarily a good idea. He might just be a really high level individual contributor and not a very good sales leader or sales manager. The big mistakes that happen, and they are so costly because of the time, in two ways. One, it takes time to bring these people on board. And then it takes time to figure out that they're not good. It takes time to offboard them. And then the whole while, you're not growing, because that whole cycle took the time. If you had the right person, all of the aspects of that department would be growing rather than staying the same or shrinking, right? And you could have just moved on and started, as that department was growing, moved on and started filling another role with the right person, and then that department would start be growing. Instead, you have to spend all this time inordinately on this department that you mishired for, and then find someone else to replace, and you couldn't even hire the next person you need. And so when you're thinking about this, and this is the big takeaway for everyone, is that speed comes from picking the right people and knowing what right looks like. And don't get me wrong, you're going to make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But I can tell you that it's very easy to know when someone is not a stud. It's harder to know if someone comes in and starts as a stud and then goes down. But I can tell you that every single stud that I've had, every single A player I've had, I've known they were an A player within the first couple days. And so I've had A players who then stop being A players. But if someone is not an A player up front, I've never had someone become an A player. And so your tolerance, or my tolerance for non-excellence, continues to decrease in time so that I can not waste the time of trying to figure out whether this person is going to help me grow the business. In terms of the thing that is probably getting in your way, it's your tolerance is too high for people who are not that good, and a misunderstanding of what the roles look like that you need to hire. And so the things that you need to do are to decrease your tolerance and find people who already know what this role looks like when it is excellent. All right, so don't take advice from people who are one step ahead of you, right? Because they might not know. I mean, how many times have you heard someone say, oh, I've got this new so-and-so, they're so great. And then 4 months later, they're like, oh no, I actually got rid of that person. It didn't work out. Don't listen to people who are like 2 steps, 1 step ahead or 6 months ahead. Like, it's not useful. Find somebody who's built multiple of the types of departments that you're looking for, scaled it for a long period of time, and then that person will be able to share what the requisites are